You know what terrifies me most about money, and it should terrify you too. It is not losing it in a market crash. It is not making a bad investment. It is something far more dangerous. It is the quiet erosion of wealth that happens when you stop paying attention, when you think you have finally figured it all out. I have spent decades studying the patterns of wealth and poverty, and there is one thing I have observed again and again. The moment people hit their 40s, something shifts. They get comfortable. They think they have earned the right to coast. They believe their salary will keep rising and their pension will take care of them and the government will somehow fill in the gaps. And that right there is the beginning of the end. Let me tell you something that Ray Dalio understood long before most of us were even thinking about money. Wealth is not static. It is a living, breathing thing. It either grows or it dies. There is no middle ground, and the people who lose their wealth after 40 are not the ones who take wild risks. They are the ones who stop moving altogether. Think about water for a moment. When water flows, it stays fresh and clean and life-giving. But when it sits still, it stagnates. It breeds bacteria. It becomes toxic. Your money works exactly the same way. The second you stop actively managing it, actively learning, actively adapting, it begins to rot from the inside out. Now I want you to imagine two people both earning £60,000 a year. Both are 42 years old. Both have families, mortgages, cars. On paper they look identical. But 10 years later, one of them has built a portfolio worth £500,000, while the other is drowning in debt, wondering where it all went wrong. What happened between them? It was not luck. It was not inheritance. It was one simple decision repeated every single day. One person treated their money like a garden that needed tending. The other treated it like a car park where money just sits doing nothing. Here is the brutal truth that nobody wants to hear. After 40, your earning years are limited. You might have 20 good years left, maybe 25 if you are lucky, but your expenses are not slowing down. Your kids need university. Your parents might need care. Your body starts demanding more from the health system. And inflation, that silent thief, is eating away at everything you have saved. So when you choose to ignore your finances, when you hand over control to someone else and just hope for the best, you are not being sensible. You are gambling with your future. And the house always wins when you are not paying attention. Ray Dalio talks about principles, and his first principle is this: truth, or more precisely, an accurate understanding of reality, is the essential foundation for any good outcome. Most people live in financial fantasy. They think their salary is their wealth. They think their house is an asset, when really it is just a place they owe money on. They think they are middle class, when actually they are one redundancy away from panic. I met a man last year in Manchester. Nice bloke. Worked in middle management for a solid company. 51 years old. He came to me because his company had just restructured and his role was being made redundant. He had a mortgage with 15 years left on it, 2 kids still at home, and when I asked him about his savings, he looked at me like I had asked him to solve quantum physics. He had nothing. Well, not nothing. He had about £8,000 in a cash ISA, earning practically zero interest. He thought that was sensible. He thought keeping it safe in the bank was the smart move. But inflation had been eating it alive for years. In real terms, he had less money than he did 5 years earlier. This is the mistake. Not investing badly, not taking crazy risks, but doing nothing at all. Letting your money sit there like a lump of clay while the world moves on without you. The wealthy do not make this mistake. They understand something fundamental. Money must work harder than you do. If you are trading your time for money, you will always hit a ceiling. There are only so many hours in a day. But if your money is out there working, growing, multiplying while you sleep, then you have broken free from that ceiling. And here is where most people get it wrong after 40. They think investment is complicated. They think you need to be some kind of financial genius to make your money grow. So they do nothing. They park their cash in a savings account, getting 1 or 2%, while inflation runs at 4 or 5 or 6%, and they wonder why they feel poorer every year. Let me share something with you that changed everything for me. There is a concept called the rule of 72. You take the number 72 and divide it by your rate of return, and that tells you how many years it takes for your money to double. So if you are earning 7%, your money doubles every 10 years roughly. But if you are earning 1% in a savings account, your money takes 72 years to double. You will be dead before it happens. Now think about that. Really think about it. If you have 20,000 pounds sitting in a low interest account, you are actively choosing poverty. Not today, not tomorrow, but 10 years from now, when everything costs twice as much and your money has barely moved. Ray Dalio built one of the most successful hedge funds in history, not by being the smartest person in the room, but by understanding cycles. He understood that economies move in patterns, markets rise and fall, asset prices fluctuate, and the people who win are not the ones who try to time everything perfectly. They are the ones who stay in the game long enough to benefit from the upward cycles. But after 40, people panic. They think they have missed the boat. They see younger people buying property or investing in stocks, and they think it is too late for them. So they sit on the sidelines holding cash, watching their purchasing power evaporate year after year. I want to destroy that myth right now. It is never too late, but you cannot afford to waste another day. If you are 45 and you start investing properly today, you still have 20 years before traditional retirement age, 20 years of compound growth, 20 years of dividends reinvesting, 20 years of your money making more money, but only if you start, only if you stop making excuses. Here is what the wealthy know that you might not. Diversification is not about having 3 different bank accounts. It is about spreading your money across different asset classes that behave differently in different economic conditions. When inflation rises, certain assets protect you. When markets crash, others hold steady. When interest rates change, some investments thrive while others suffer. The average person after 40 has everything in one basket. Their home. That is it. They think because house prices generally rise, they are building wealth. But they forget about the mortgage interest, the maintenance costs, the fact that you cannot eat bricks when you retire. Smart wealth builders have their money in multiple places. Some in property, yes, but also in stocks, in bonds, in commodities, in businesses. They understand that no single investment is perfect, but together they create a safety net that catches them no matter which way the economy swings. And here is the part that really separates the winners from the losers. The wealthy reinvest their returns. When they make money from an investment, they do not rush out and buy a new car or a fancy holiday. They take that profit and they put it back to work. They let it compound. They let it grow on top of growth on top of growth. This is how ordinary people become millionaires. Not through lottery wins or inheritance, through the boring, unglamorous discipline of putting money to work and leaving it alone long enough to multiply. I know what you are thinking. This sounds great, but where do I even start? And that is the question that stops most people. They get overwhelmed by choice. Should I buy individual stocks or funds? Should I invest in property or pensions? Should I pay off debt first or invest while I still owe money? And because they cannot answer every question perfectly, they answer none of them. They freeze, and freezing is the most expensive decision you will ever make. Here is my advice, and this comes from watching thousands of people either build wealth or lose it. Start somewhere, anywhere. Open an investment account today. Put in £50, £100, whatever you can afford. Buy a simple low-cost index fund that tracks the entire market. And then do it again next month. And the month after that. You do not need to understand every company in the index. You do not need to predict which stocks will soar. You just need to own a piece of the entire economy and let human progress do the heavy lifting. Because here is what history tells us. Over the long term, economies grow, businesses innovate, productivity increases, and the people who own shares in that growth become wealthier. Not overnight, not without ups and downs, but consistently over time. The mistake people make after 40 is thinking they need certainty before they act. They want guaranteed returns. They want zero risk. They want someone to promise them that everything will work out perfectly. And because that does not exist, they do nothing. But doing nothing is not zero risk. It is the highest risk of all. Because while you wait for certainty, inflation is robbing you. Opportunities are passing you by. Time is running out. Ray Dalio talks about making mistakes and learning from them. He says pain plus reflection equals progress. And I think this is critical for anyone over 40 who feels like they have wasted years. Maybe you have made bad financial decisions. Maybe you spent when you should have saved. Maybe you trusted the wrong people with your money. Maybe you believed that your job would last forever and it did not. That pain is real. But it is also valuable because now you know better. Now you understand that nobody is coming to save you. The government will give you a state pension that barely covers rent. Your employer will give you whatever they are legally required to and not a penny more. Your children will have their own financial struggles. This is on you. And that is actually good news because it means you are in control. Let me tell you about a woman I know. Sarah. She is 48, divorced, 2 teenagers, works as a teacher. When her marriage ended, she got half of very little, about £30,000. She was terrified. She thought her financial life was over. But instead of panicking, she did something smart. She educated herself. She read books. She listened to podcasts. She joined investment communities online. And she started small. She put £500 into a stocks and shares ISA. Then another 500 the next month. She kept her expenses low. She stopped trying to impress people with things she could not afford. She drove an old car. She bought clothes secondhand. She said no to expensive holidays. 5 years later, she has built a portfolio worth over £60,000. Not because she earned a fortune. She is a teacher for goodness sake. But because she was consistent. Because she prioritized her future over her ego. Because she understood that wealth is built in private long before it is seen in public. And here is what nobody tells you about investing after 40. It becomes addictive in the best possible way. Once you see your money growing, once you watch your net worth climb, once you realize that you are actually building something real, you cannot stop. It gives you a sense of control in a world that often feels chaotic. You start looking at expenses differently. That £50 meal out is not just £50. It is £50 that could have become £100 in 10 years. That new phone you do not really need is not just £600. It is £600 that could have funded a month of your retirement. This is not about being miserable or denying yourself everything. It is about being intentional. It is about asking yourself whether this purchase is moving you closer to freedom or further into dependence. Because that is what this is really about: freedom. The freedom to leave a job you hate. The freedom to help your kids without going into debt yourself. The freedom to retire with dignity instead of scraping by on scraps. The freedom to make choices based on what you want, not what you can barely afford. And the only way to get that freedom is to make your money work for you instead of you working yourself to death for money that disappears as fast as it arrives. Now I know some of you are sitting there thinking this all sounds wonderful, but you have debt, credit cards, loans, maybe even a mortgage that feels crushing, and you think you cannot invest until the debt is gone. Here is the truth. It depends on the debt. If you have credit card debt at 18% interest, then yes, pay that off first. That is an emergency. But if you have a mortgage at 3% and you are wondering whether to overpay or invest, the answer is almost always invest, because over time the stock market returns far more than 3%. Your mortgage is cheap debt. Use it wisely. The wealthy understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. Bad debt is money borrowed to buy things that lose value: cars, holidays, clothes, gadgets. Good debt is money borrowed to buy things that gain value or generate income: property that you rent out, a business that produces profit, education that increases your earning power. After 40, you cannot afford bad debt. Every pound you owe on a credit card is a pound that should have been working for your future. Every payment you make on a car loan is money that could have been compounding in an index fund. This is why the wealth gap keeps growing. The poor borrow to consume, the rich borrow to invest, and over 20 or 30 years, that difference becomes astronomical. But here is the beautiful thing: you can switch sides right now, today, this moment. You can decide that from this point forward, you are going to think like an investor, not a consumer. You are going to ask yourself whether each decision builds wealth or destroys it. And I promise you, within 6 months, your entire financial life will look different. Not because you suddenly earned more money, but because you stopped throwing it away on things that do not matter. Ray Dalio says that the biggest mistake people make is not knowing what they do not know. And in finance, this is deadly. Most people have no idea how compound interest works. They do not understand inflation. They do not know the difference between nominal returns and real returns. They have never calculated how much they actually need to retire. So they drift, they hope, they assume it will somehow work out. And then they wake up at 60 with almost nothing, and they wonder how they got there. Do not be that person. Educate yourself. Not because you need to become a financial expert, but because your future depends on making a handful of good decisions and avoiding a handful of catastrophic ones. The decisions you make in the next 5 years will determine the next 30, whether you live with dignity and choice or whether you live with regret and dependence. Whether you build a legacy or leave a burden. This is not dramatic, this is math. And the math does not care about your feelings or your excuses or your fear. It simply calculates. And right now it is calculating whether you will be okay or whether you will struggle. The choice is yours. But you have to make it now. Not next year, not when things calm down, not when you finally understand everything. Now, because every day you wait is a day of compound growth you will never get back.